All right, let's jump into some more of your questions here. Hey, I don't know if this kind of thing happens to you too, but obviously I always believed in Beth's survival, but it really struck me today because I saw a Rosita edit on TikTok and it made me so sad, and then I was like, why does this make me more sad than Beth? And I fully realized that I was sad because there's no hope in Rosita's survival. She's been bitten and buried, and there's no coming back from that, but Beth's death is so open-ended it doesn't feel like a death at all. Yeah, I mean, for sure. I was super depressed for a week or two after Coda happened because, you know, like everyone else, I thought it was real. And then once I started looking into TD, that just completely evaporated and went away. I was like, oh yeah, okay, we're good. She'll be back. So yeah, for sure. I mean, I look back at other character deaths, characters that I really liked, and yeah, it's super sad. So I totally feel you. Yeah, I think that does happen to a lot of us. And I don't know. I do get people who say they can't watch the end of Coda because it's too sad or it's too violent. And I understand that. I mean, I think it was traumatic for everybody the first time we watched it, but I actually don't have too much trouble watching it anymore because I believe that she's coming back. And even though it's still super sad, I mean, for Daryl and for all of the characters and everything, it's definitely an emotional scene. I don't get super down about it in the long term because I know we'll see her again. So yeah, I totally know what you mean. Oh my gosh, I love your username, Sarcastic Octopi. That's an amazing username. Okay, not a question. I'm really just coming in to drop off the latest Insta story from Emily that made my heart literally just into my throat. I can't wait for your thoughts. Yeah, I saw this actually. Somebody, quite a few people probably sent this to me. So yeah, this is a really good example, first of all, of what I always say about how they find opportunities to tease us about Walking Dead symbolism. So I don't think that that the show or the writers necessarily dictate every single thing that they post on their Instagram. So, you know, we sometimes get a lot of criticism from others saying, you guys read way too much into this. You know, they're just posting normal stuff on their Instagram. Not everything means something about The Walking Dead. And that's probably true. I mean, because we look for this stuff, I'm sure there are some things that we have tried to interpret that will end up being incorrect. Okay, so they have a point. But I also think that the actors are encouraged to find ways to hint at it with everyday events. And that way, if anybody questions them on it, they can say, no, I was just walking down the street doing my thing. And you know what I mean? It's like plausible deniability. But this is a really good example. I mean, Emily probably really is reading this book. It's an Oprah's book club pick, right? It's Viola Davis. But I don't think it's a coincidence that she's posting this on her social media. I mean, there's Find Me, which was a big Daryl romance episode, and that we found a ton of ties to Beth in, and it was very, very symbolic, right? There's the fact that he actually wrote that in the note, come find me, that he was looking for Beth, so him searching for her is a thing. It's like a big focus of the whole story, and then that it's happening on the heels of her saying some really suspicious stuff that might be hinting about Beth returning. I mean, if she was posting this at any other time when there was nothing else suspicious going on, I might say, well, she really might be just reading that book and the title's a coincidence. You know, she does post books that she reads pretty often. But put it together with everything else and there's just no way. There's no way I think that this just so happens to be. I don't buy that at all. So, yeah, I do think that she posted this on purpose. I mean, again, she probably really is reading the book, but she saw an opportunity to hint at Beth's storyline and Beth coming back and what we're going to see coming up. So, yeah, absolutely. And thanks for sending that in. And I 100% am with you. I think it's super, super suspicious. Apparently this was removed for the first episode of season 2. How's that Kool-Aid taste? But Isabel doesn't get the reference. Daryl, I'm not sure this is where I'm supposed to be. Isabel scrutinizes Daryl, and even though she's afraid of the answer she has to ask, you don't think you could be happy here? Daryl, I don't know, could you? Isabel, yes, I could. If what? A charged beat. It's clear there are feelings. They hold a look. The longer I'm away, the longer they're waiting for me, wondering if I'm still alive. Isabel nods, sympathetic to the fact that he has people. Actually, I saw this in the sneak peek, so I don't know that this has actually been removed from the first episode. I think this was in the sneak peek for the first episode. Anyway, a caroler posted this with this in the way Daryl was looking at Isabel last season. I'm afraid they're going to put them together. So this goes back to, okay, first of all, we're pretty sure from the leaked pages, the manuscript, that Isabel dies. So there's not going to be a romance. I did notice this in the sneak peek that I think I interpreted it just a little bit differently, but it pretty much boils down to the same thing. So let's go through this line by line. Okay. Number one, how's that Kool-Aid taste? That line I actually don't remember, but I probably just kind of missed it. The thing that makes me think is that Isabel is going to die by poisoning. I don't know if that will be true, but Kool-Aid, drinking the Kool-Aid, that's a very specific cultural, like, historical reference to poisoning via cyanide, I think, is what they used at Jonestown. Anyway, that's kind of an interesting reference. If it isn't referring to how Isabel dies, it's referring to something else. It's referring to, it could be referring to the cult mindset where people are just doing things that don't make sense because they're following someone blindly. So anyway, that jumps out at me as a really interesting reference that he says that. This is not where I'm supposed to be. You don't think you could be happy here? I don't know. Could you? Yes, I could. So this is the part that I noticed. I did notice that they kind of look at each other, and actually, to me, this is a little bit, I don't know. I guess I would have to go back and look and watch it again. I only watched it once, like several weeks ago, but I felt like the charged look came before Isabel answered. So I don't know if I'm remembering that wrong or if this was written down incorrectly, but I did notice it. And I understand that people are interpreting that as him looking at her in a romantic way. I'm going to say the same thing here that I always say about Daryl and Carol in season 301, when they're on top of the bus. And that is that Daryl is open to it. He is lonely and he wants companionship. So, and this may sound a little bit strange, but pretty much any woman who came up to him and wanted a relationship, he would probably be okay with that because he is so lonely. He just wants somebody to be with him. And so it wouldn't necessarily matter who it is. And I know that sounds a little bit strange and like, well, that's not terribly romantic, but at this point, he's so lonely that he would love and be loyal to anybody. He really would. If somebody was loyal to him and would love him, he would do the same thing back. Now, of course, that's not the diehard love story that we all want, but that's where he's at in his life right now. And I kind of always felt like that's how it was with him and Carol on top of the bus. Like, it crossed his mind. Like, is there going to be romance here? But she's the one that shut it down and laughed and said, she said, you want to screw around, and then started laughing, and he got that she was thinking that was stupid that they would ever screw around romantically, and that was fine with him because he's not in love with Carol. That's not what we're saying here, that he's not in love with Carol. He was just open to, is this a possibility for the future? And when she shut it down, he's like, okay, cool. And then it's very, very significant that right after that, they get down off the bus and Beth is singing and he stares at Beth, because that is the major difference between the interaction between him and Carol and the interaction between him and Beth. With Carol, he was open to it, but he wasn't heartbroken if she wasn't. He was like, oh, okay, whatever, But with Beth, he was staring at her. That's a whole different thing, right? Anyway, I feel like we're kind of doing the same thing here with Isabel. He's very lonely, and he is open to having a romance with her. If she let him know in any way, shape, or form that she wanted to be with him romantically, yes, I do think he would be with her. But it's not because he's inherently in love with her. It's because he knows her and he's comfortable with her. And now they have a history after everything that happened in season 1. And yeah, he likes her. I mean, she's not someone he can't stand or anything. And so he'd be open to that. And so I think he is fishing a little bit here, but he's fishing it's kind of the same thing we saw in season 1, where he's just sad that there's nobody that is with him, that he wants companionship. Okay, that it's not the same thing as being in love with someone. And I don't know, I think when I say that, people don't necessarily love that because we want to see the really epic romance, but that's the point. They're setting up these other things, his relationships with these women, to show that even though he wants a romantic relationship and he's very open to it, he's also not in love with them in a way that, like, he can't control. You know what I mean? Like, with Beth, he was always drawn to her emotionally. And we're not seeing that in the same way with these other characters. So when Beth shows up, we will get the epic love story, and it will be different than just, hey, I'm open to this. You know what I mean? But they're doing that on purpose here. Probably partly to tease the audience, but also to show that he is very ready for a relationship. But I mean, the fact is, the thing that I thought when I was watching this play out in the sneak peek is that he kind of was fishing to see how she felt about things by saying, could you be happy here? I mean, he is kind of equating that he's going to stay with her in a lot of ways. Well, you know, it's important to him where she's going to be, you know, and there is a little bit of a charged moment there, and that would be her moment. If there ever was one, to say, you know, I want to be where you are too, and I feel this way about you too. And she turns away. She pushes it away. She is not interested in a romantic relationship with Daryl, and that's fine. You know, obviously we would all prefer that. But that's the message he's getting too. So anyway, I get that people interpret this a certain way and it worries them. But number one, we're pretty sure Isabel is going to die. I mean, from that script, it pretty much says that she is dead and he sees a hallucination of her. But again, let's put it this way. If he ended up in a relationship with Isabel, if that were to happen, then I would have to eat my words on this, and, you know, then I wouldn't know what I was talking about, and obviously I would be interpreting this the way that I want to interpret it. But we've seen this before. We've seen it with Daryl and Carol. Not as much with Connie, this direct thing, but a little bit with Connie. And he's never been in a relationship with any of them. So just the precedent of that, the fact that they're doing the same thing again, tells me that it's not going to be a relationship, which I already knew, and we already knew. Anyway, so just keep in mind that we've seen this with other relationships he has, and none of them have turned romantic. I guess actually another good example of what they're getting at here would actually be Leah, because he was somewhat interested in Leah. He was very lonely, and he did go to where she was, and they would talk and everything. But she still had to, in a very big way, initiate the relationship. You know what I mean? And so Daryl's kind of waiting for somebody else to do that. I think by asking these questions, you know, like of Isabel, he's letting her know he would be open to it, but she has to reciprocate, or he's going to assume she's not interested, which clearly Isabel is not. Anyway, so I think that's just their way of showing that whoever is going to be with him needs to let him know that, like, otherwise he's not going to pursue it. So anyway, this doesn't bother me too much, and I'm not at all surprised they would put something like this in there, because I think it's very in line with where he was in season 1. But I do understand why it might upset some people. But again, we're like pretty much 100% positive now that Isabel is going to die by the end of season 2. So I wouldn't worry about it, at least in terms of the romance with Isabel. All right, next one. Ugh, I'm so annoyed. Why in the trailer is Daryl saying to Laurent that him and Isabel and Laurent are all going to go to America together? Barf. I know Bethyl is endgame, but this whole Daryl in a family unit with Isabel and Laurent and caring about them this much after only being with them for a month, possibly shorter, is stupid and pointless and makes no sense. I really hope Isabel kicks the can this season. Well, as I was saying, we're pretty sure Isabel's going to die. I think really I think this is part of setting up the plot, though, because we're not sure, given the leaked pages, we're not sure where Laurent is at that point. He's very conspicuously missing from those pages, and I don't know, maybe he's just somewhere else and Daryl's going to go get him after that scene or something. We don't know. But we have theorized, Galadriel Jones has talked about maybe Laurent is kidnapped by the same faction that Jeanette is part of and taken to Spain. That would actually make a lot of sense for why Daryl would go there. I don't think, especially if Isabel is dead, that he's going to leave Laurent behind, unless, I don't know, unless they found some really great familial situation, community, and Laurent wanted to stay rather than go back to America. I don't know. But the fact that they're setting it up that way and Daryl's saying that to him, it's just showing that Daryl is loyal to Laurent now, and he's going to take care of him. I also think, even though he's including Isabel in this, he says, you and me and Isabel are going to go together. I think it's actually really significant that Isabel is not really in the scene when they say this. He's not saying this to Isabel. He's saying it to Laurent. So it's really Laurent that is the focus point of this statement. And, you know, they include Isabel because, of course, wherever Laurent goes, and if Daryl's going, then Isabel would go too. But it's important that she's not a big part of it, because moving forward, if she's going to die, she's not going to be a big part of it. You know, it's just like they had to include her in that sentence, even though they know they're going to kill her off in a few episodes, because obviously it's not going to be like Daryl's going to kidnap Laurent from Isabel and flee to America or so. You know what I mean? It's just logistics, right? So, I mean, I get it, but especially if Isabel dies, this won't even be like a problem anymore. And I think they're just setting up that, I mean, Daryl does this, you know, he really bonds with young people and wants to take care of them in the best way. You know, he's a father figure to them. He did this with Judith and RJ, and now he's doing it with Laurent. And Laurent has really imprinted on Daryl a lot too. You know, Daryl's the only father figure he's ever known. And I think Laurent would want to go wherever Daryl goes. So, and you know, there's still a lot of questions about Laurent and why Isabel thinks he's going to lead the revival of humanity, and is he immune? And there's so many questions that we have. So Daryl really needing to be strongly bonded with Laurent for whatever that ends up leading to is probably really important. So I really think that more than anything else is what they're trying to establish here, is the relationship between Daryl and Laurent. And that's going to be important for the plot moving forward. But I wouldn't worry about anything else. So, do you think the first love of Beth is Daryl? Because for me, I think she loved Daryl I think more than Jimmy and Zach. And I heard that Emily said that Beth never know what love is. And I think it's clear that when she was with Jimmy and Zach, I didn't see any romance between them, LOL. When she with Daryl, she's happy and feel comfortable with him. Every time I rewatch TWD, I always see the love in her eye when she's with Daryl, and he too. And I guess they fell in love with each other from the first look. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, she had boyfriends before Daryl, but it was very much, you know, what you would think of as a high school relationship. And, you know, some people marry their high school sweethearts, but she actually straight up told us that, though, too. Remember, during her suicide arc in season 2, Maggie kind of tried to use Jimmy as a way to sort of guilt Beth into not committing suicide. And she says, well, what about Jimmy? What about your boyfriend? And she goes, oh, so we've been dating for 3 months and now we're married. You know what I mean? She very obviously told us that even though they were dating, she was not in love with the guy, and you wouldn't really expect her to be. She was like 16 at that point. So yeah, I mean, I think the relationships she had before were not bad by any means, but they definitely were not true love relationships. And with Daryl, their relationship was established at a much deeper level. It was a level of emotional intimacy and trust and respect and being genuinely comfortable with each other before the romance really took hold. And I think that's exactly what the writers wanted to do, was to show that relationship and how it had a lot of depth as compared to the other guys that she had dated. So yeah, I completely agree with you on that, and I think that's a really great observation. All right, Boofy, Facebook weirdness again. So a Facebook page titled Walking Dead posted 4 pics with the title, If There Were Happily Ever Afters in The Walking Dead. These are behind the scenes still shots, nothing that we saw aired. One is totally expected, Glenn on a blanket playing with one of the toddlers who played baby Herschel. Another is Herschel and the governor smiling and clasping hands in a bro shake. That's awesome. Okay, well, the fall of the prison and Herschel's death was a pivotal point in the story. Next, we have Tyrese hugging Lizzie and Mika. The Grove was also a highly acclaimed episode. Last, we have Beth in costume from the final shooting of Coda hugging Rick, which is a pretty famous picture, actually. The reason these pics hit me as so random was no Carol and Henry/Sophia, huge storylines. Nothing with Daryl, even put him with Beth and especially Merle. But here is the biggie, no Carl. Yeah, Except for Rick, Carl is way bigger and a more important character than any of the others pictured. A pic of Carl, a more grown-up pic of Judith and Michonne, Carl and Rick, I don't get it. So, okay, let me think about this for a minute. Honestly, I mean, I don't know if this Facebook page is a fan page or not. If it's a fan page, we can't really read into it. I mean, we have said before that I think some of the big fan pages might be run by the show and they're just being disguised as fan pages, but we don't know that for sure. They really could just be fan pages. So we have to be careful about that. But if, assuming that this was real and was official, if I were to try to interpret it, all of these in a big way point toward where we are now in the story. And here's why I say that. I mean, we have this leaked manuscript where Daryl names Merle, Glenn, and Beth, right? So the Beth one is definitely interesting. I mean, just another time they're posting about her and reminding us of her. The Glenn one is the same way because he names Glenn, and Daryl very much feels like he got Glenn killed because Negan told him not to move and then he moved, right? So those are maybe kind of obvious. The other two are interesting, though. 408, when the prison went down, it was a big deal. And I mean, everybody thought that back then. It wasn't like nobody realized that or anything. It was a big deal. I mean, Herschel died, and the home that they had been living in for the past 2 seasons was gone. And the group schismed into all these little groups. And those little groups very much informed arcs over the next several seasons. So we saw some obvious ones. We saw Michonne and Rick and Carl together, and then later they would actually become a family. I mean, it's interesting that Michonne and Rick didn't actually get together until season 6. I mean, that was like 2 years, two seasons after the prison fell. So that was definitely a foreshadowing, right? Maggie and Glenn being separated and her thinking he was dead. Yes, of course, they did reunite in season 4, but that was a foreshadow for something that was going to happen eventually and that she was going to be without Glenn. So there's really obvious foreshadows there, and that's why it's so important that it was Daryl and Beth together, because that is a foreshadow of what's going to be the case. And you can't get away from that. It was not Daryl and Carol, right? But anyway, not to get too far off track, that was a really big deal, and it felt like 408, when the prison went down, was a catalyst for everything that came after. Because if that hadn't happened and the governor had not returned, they would probably still be there at that prison. So that was a big deal in terms of the overarching, many seasons long arcs. So I think that could be why they're including the governor and Herschel. They're like going back to the moment when everything changed. And we can also say, very obviously, that if the prison hadn't happened, Beth would not have been shot. She and Daryl wouldn't have been out in the woods. They wouldn't have burned down the moonshine shack. They wouldn't have grabbed the wrong attention. She wouldn't have been taken. I mean, none of it would have happened, right? So I feel like the governor taking down the prison was like ground zero of everything that kind of exploded afterward. The other thing to remember, too, is that Herschel was in Rick's hallucination in 905. So Herschel is still seen as kind of the father of the group and the wise man of the group. And it's important that we have continued to see him at really pivotal moments. Then you have the only one left then is Tyrese hugging Lizzie and Mika. And to me, that is very, very much a way to inform Carol's arc. Because we know that Carol has this recurring thing about deceased children. Of course, there was Sophia, and that's the big one. Then we saw Lizzie and Mika. We saw Sam. We saw eventually Henry. So, I mean, it could be that we don't have a picture of Carol Melissa behind the scenes hugging Lizzie and Mika, so they used what they had. But to me, I mean, as we come into Daryl Dixon season 2, think about what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with Carol's arc, and we're dealing with Daryl, of course, and Daryl talks specifically about Beth and Glenn, and it says also in those leaked pages that Carol hallucinates Sophia. So this is all really, really linked to where they're going emotionally, like with the internal arcs of Daryl and Carol in Daryl Dixon season 2. So again, I have no idea if this post is official or sanctioned. If it's not, then all the speculation is kind of moot. But if it is, or if we could hypothetically say that it was, that's how I would interpret that. I think and it is very subtle. You have to understand that. Like, most people are not going to pick that up from those pictures, but this is what they're hinting at. And I don't know, I'm sure I've said this before, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but The Walking Dead, their writers, their marketers, whoever you want to say it, are really good at this. You might say, well, what's the point of posting something like that if 99% of the audience isn't even going to get it? Guys, there's a very good reason for posting it, okay? There's such thing as the subconscious mind and what we absorb subconsciously, and we're not aware of that consciously a lot of the times. But if they can market subconsciously to the audience, it will prime the audience for what's happening next. And that way they're not, obviously overtly giving spoilers, but they're still marketing and hinting at what's going to come. And I think that Gimple and the people who work on the show are just masters at that. You see it all over the place, the way that they market. And people even get sometimes angry about it. They might be like, well, why are you doing this? Or why'd you have to kill off that character? And the fact that they're having an emotional reaction to it at all shows that it's kind of working. So anyway, that's a really interesting post, and I hope that it's official, because if it is, I think that that's really positive for us, and it's showing where that they're going to end up going with things. And if it's not, well, it's fun to speculate anyway. So thanks for sending that in. All right, I'm over time, so I'm going to call it here, but I will be back soon. And yeah, don't have too much longer, only about a month till it comes back on. I'm so excited. Talk to you guys soon.